So I'm Safruti. I'm going to talk about social login. I'll go in a little bit about what specifically I'm going to talk about within social login and how we can make it more practical. So just a little bit about who I am. I'm the founder and CTO of Perimeter X. We're doing behavioral-based web protection. So we're protecting websites from automated attacks. And a lot of the factors that I'll talk about from social login is the benefits or the perceived benefits or the risks when you as a site or an application are utilizing some third-party login or social login. So what I'm not going to cover in this talk, especially given the conference, I'm not talk about potential vulnerabilities and threats for OAuth 2 and OpenID. I'm not talking about the risk of putting all your eggs in one basket and what happens if you crack into that basket or if you manage to get that, or something like the Yahoo leak and the potential for if people were using the Yahoo ID. So I'm not going to cover that. So how it all started, a little bit on motivation and why we should care about it and how we started looking at it at Perimeter X. So last year, one of our customers who we protect against all kind of type of brute force attack called us one day with showing this graph, basically showing, now what this graph should show is obviously the spike of accounts being created, where this is the average of accounts being created on the system used to be about 100, and suddenly it spiked to around 900 and kept there very steady. They're saying it's obviously automated. You're protecting our login. How come you're not detecting it? What's going on here? Well, looking into that, what we found out that when you look at their login page, there are two routes. One for a bot trying, once they start enabling us, bots going through the regular account creation, user password, creating it. We're deployed there on that path, and it failed. But when social login was used, basically the underlying assumption is that Google and Facebook will know to verify that you're a human. They won't let you create an account if you're not. So no point on deploying any mechanism or any protection on that route, which was obviously wrong, and led to all these accounts created using vulnerabilities or potential vulnerabilities and attacks using social login credentials. We'll go into more details, and this brought us to figuring out what's the risk there. How should you deploy or how should you utilize a social login when you're building an application? Some other potential, once you do that, what's the risk with doing that? So again, it could be used to deploy a botnet or to distribute malware, basically. In many cases, basically, what can you do? What permissions can you do on that application once you logged in? If it's, for instance, Dropbox or Box, having file sharing, if you use the social login credentials to do that, you can potentially distribute malware in a very hard to trace way because every user will have their own malware distribution, a very efficient distribution way. We've seen cases where people's account would be hacked through their Facebook or other social profiles and create profiles on dating sites, and the botnets will basically collect attribution from the dating sites or other sites for people registering. Now, obviously, using Facebook or something like this, I can create a very reliable profile. I have the name, I have photos, I have friends. I can really create a highly reliable profile, not good for the user. I know I wouldn't want my profile to be on a Russian dating site, and also not good for the dating site who is paying for not real users. Obviously, when talking about enterprise, I know in our company and in many other companies using Google login, for instance, as a single sign-on for all your enterprise applications, compromising that, again, a big risk. I'm happy to talk later on sidetracks on the interesting methods they utilize and the botnets, but again, this is more about like how can you do that and what can we do. So happy to talk about it later. So let's take a step back and why do people utilize social login? So for the users, it's very, very helpful. It's a much easier mechanism. I control one place that I trust and use it to log into everywhere else in a trustworthy way. I don't need to manage passwords, and I feel like I can trust Google with all my credentials and identities. For sites, again, it's much better conversion, easier conversion. I don't need to go around that. Simpler registration, and it feels that it's more secure. I mean, I don't need to manage passwords and users and all that. I don't need to store all these credentials, and conversions are much higher. So for the user experience, for the product guys, it's a much easier way to get users. So let's start challenging that, and this is where things are turning on to be interesting. So we took here a site, and basically when you use that, you use it either to create a new account, if you want to help a user register, or if you already have an account, to just easier to sign in. And let's challenge these two options and verify what exactly do you get and what you don't. So in many cases, you get a trust by proxy. If you're vendor, Google, Facebook, Twitter, all these guys, I mean, you tap into a huge user base. They have some seal of approval also on the user. It's actual credentials. You're talking to a real user. You know that the email won't bounce back, so very good. You got that from it. But typically when you log in, if you opt for that, which is the default, you're basically logged in for 30 days. You won't need to, the user will not need to introduce a password, will not need, even if there is a two-factor authentication, you won't need to factor it from that device, which means that from that point on, if I'm already logged in, when I'm using that mechanism of Google or Facebook or any kind of social login on my site, and the user is logging in, I don't know that he actually used the password, or it's not some malware or someone abusing this session and using an open session. I don't know if it's someone I can trust. I know it's legitimate credentials, but I don't know much more than that. So this is one risk and one path that we saw that many cases are in many places users are overlooking it. The other part, which you would assume is more strict, is the create new account. Basically, when you click that, usually you'll have a pop-up message showing something. So in order to elaborate on the risks and the figuring out exactly what you get from the vendors, we ran, I won't do the demo, but basically I built two Chrome extensions, one to work around Facebook login, one to work around Google login. And I created a mock-up website that basically trusts that to create an account. What this extension will do is, again, this is for Facebook. Once the user is logged into Facebook, and the reason you need to do that is that Facebook will validate that the token exchange on OAuth is coming from a Facebook origin. So the request, the XHR request or whatever of the, I want to approve this application, needs to come from a Facebook session, from a Facebook window. So the extension will quietly wait until the user will visit Facebook. And once it's there, it will basically send a get access to from Facebook, which will typically result in that. But when you're doing it, you can do just the XHR. You don't need to display the image. The user actually does not see anything. So everything is just an XHR request. You get a request, you get the data. From the data, actually, you process the user parameter and you structure a post request to grant access to your app. You know in advance what app, the ID of the app on the store. And by doing that, Facebook basically grants you access. So once the user is logged in, the extension is doing everything in the background, creates an account on that third-party application. And again, the application didn't see anything. The application basically did not verify, approve, did not see a request from the user. But the next time the user will go into the application, will not say create an account, will just say login, and the application will work with Facebook and say, okay, is this user verified? Did this user approve my application to access to Facebook? Facebook will say yes, they will be happy, and you can work on. So using that, I can automatically, for instance, assuming it would be an application like a Dropbox and they won't have any additional security measures, I can, without the user knowing, create an account using the Facebook credentials, upload something, and do something on it. With Google, it's very similar. I'll get the access, see that. With Google, you may have multiple accounts. So if you have multiple accounts on that part, you need to click a button. Now with Google, unlike Facebook, they will actually need to show it in a tab. This tab could be hidden. It doesn't need to be in the foreground. So you can just open a tab in the background, and malwares will do that. You can simulate the click. You can just say, okay, I'll click the first user. I approve this application. No verification that the user is actually seeing it or actually giving access. You get the access, same story all over again. So when talking about creating an account, which is expected to be a much more interactive, where a user actually grant access, even there you don't really get that. So I mean, the only validation of a human in this process is somewhere between the time where the internet was invented and the time where I asked for this grant. Somewhere there, the user created an account on Google or on Facebook. They did validate that. They will send a text message. They will validate your email address. They will do all that. But after doing that, no validation is done. So even when you create an account, you don't get any actual approval from them except the fact that it's an actual user, that it's an actual account, not an actual user. So I think the takeaway from our point was knowing that it's very important to understand what social login does not give you. It does give you the ease of use. It does give you the ease of registration, getting some validated credentials, but it does not mean that the user voluntarily wanted to do that. It does not mean that the person doing that is actually a human. It might be an automated script or botnet, as we saw, or a list of botnet of browser extensions. So it does not protect the site. It does not protect the user. And basically, when you create an account on your site, does not mean that there was any human verification. It's not the social account creation. It's just for the social login. It's just a login. Now, is it a vulnerability or not? Can we expect the social login vendor to be more responsible? Well, I did contact Facebook. I did contact asking them about, like, hey, I managed to create an account without the user being notified, without any validation on your behalf. On doing that, basically they're saying, no, if it's a malware, you only can do that from within a browser. Basically, it's a Chrome issue. Chrome should protect you from bad extensions. Basically, send an email to Chrome. Open a ticket there on, is it a vulnerability? Is it something that you're responsible to? Now, this is a very funny thing, because on one side, this functionality is allowed in an extension to send XHRs and do all that. But it's also against the Chrome Web Store policy. So, I mean, is it allowed or not? Basically, pointing finger, everyone is saying that it's someone else's response to do that, basically leaving the response on the website. When talking to Google again and Google Chrome, again, it was even more confusing because neither of them took responsibility. And it's just there, and the fact is there are a lot of Chrome extensions and other browser extensions that are just utilizing that mechanisms and doing these kind of things of them. So to recap, what we've seen is that, again, social login is great for the things that it is providing, mostly for ease of use, and this is how you should consider that. It can also provide additional benefits. Again, with Google, you get two-factor authentication and things like this, but you need to be very cautious about what you don't get. It does not secure the user. It does not secure the site. And it only says that the credentials are right. So what can we do? How can we manage that? How can we help protect that? So one thing is, I think, especially in a forum like here and in groups, we can try and potentially demand the social login vendors to be more responsible, or to provide more capabilities for me as someone who is utilizing that to verify that when I'm enabling an application, it's not just popping a window where someone can automate the click in a hidden window or just send a message, even though the protocol, OAuth, or things like this will allow that, but actually be more responsible and do the validation. And we know that they're doing these validations because if you're going to your admin account on a Google application, they will insist for the two-factor authentication, and they will insist for you to type in the password, and they will insist and verify that the user is actually doing that. They know to track the mouse movement, that you're not doing it in the background. So they do have the tools to do that, but they're not necessarily exposing it. So for me as an application, if I want to say I want to verify that the user actually approved that, or for me as a user, if I'm managing my policy as an enterprise using Google as social login, as a single sign-on, I want to turn this policy on that basically forces the user or Google to validate that a user and a human actually approve that. So I think this is a great thing to do. Currently, they don't see that as part of their responsibility. So until they'll do that, or until we can get them to do that, then what can we actually do? So some of the recommendations, some of the things that we're doing on our own and helping our customers and everyone we're talking to is basically, so you should use credentials strictly as credentials. When you create an account, when a user logs in, enforce the same type of controls, logic, and protection that you would do when the user is actually just logging in. When the user is creating an account using a user and password. So again, you don't need necessarily to validate the email, but if you want to verify that it's a user, you may want to restrict some actions. So for instance, you may want to limit the amount of actions you can do when the account was just created. You can show a CAPTCHA. You can do things that will help you validate that it's actually what it is. The other thing is, again, tracking login and sign up rates from that. Regardless for that, it's the best practice in general. Have your anomalies. If you suddenly see that something is spiking from one type of things, a lot of account being created, a lot of account being abused. Again, there is a side track of all that, and most sites, if you created a user using a user and password, and with the same email, you can use Google to log in, Google credentials, or Facebook is using the same email, and somehow I got that, then basically, is it the same user or not? Most sites will just treat it as the same. So the fact that I have a password in the system, but I can log in through Facebook, Google, and maybe other on the same email, this is a potential risk, but these are things you can look about. Is someone using one method or the other? Some of the things that helped also in cases that we've seen, looking at the origin. Sometimes, again, if you're doing it through an extension or something like this, you will see that the origin of the request or the refer may be something that is not the typical route of a login. Typically, in the login page, you won't expect the login to come from a different domain or for someone doing something directly there. It's available on your access log, Splunk, or whatever method you're using, especially on sensitive actions like login and account creation. It's very important to verify, is the referrer, is the origin of the request something that makes sense. Again, forms loading within iframes. This is another trick that we've seen done. Again, because of the source in Facebook, because in many cases, using things like CSRF tokens and things like this to verify that the user is actually going through your site and not abusing this mechanism to create an account without actually visiting your site. Part of these risks are extremely dangerous, so you can do that. You can do basic things on your site like X-frame options, so you won't allow your login page to be an iframe in another site. Compare the top object to self object in JavaScript to verify if you're running within an iframe or things like this. An extension may be running you or something like that. So these are kind of things. And again, the main thing is it's pretty crazy out there, and the attackers are usually motivated by money. It's not like someone who is specifically after you. So if they find a way where they can use the login to create account and benefit from your site, and so you're enforcing some security measures, they won't necessarily fight you on that. They will just use the same trick and find the next guy who is offering a similar service and will attack them. So in many cases, it's just important to be a little better than the rest and fend away some of the attackers. It's not the best strategy in life, but in many cases, it's good enough. So with that, I'll leave some time for questions. That's it. Yeah.
So you said you weren't going to talk about the botnets that you'd seen, but can you give us an idea of statistics, counts?
Okay.
How big of a problem is this really?
So it is a huge problem. We're scanning constantly. So first of all, the fact is that the Chrome store or what browser extension stores are highly inefficient in fending them off. We've seen it looks like a very broad, so we're seeing it's highly a massive amount of browser extensions. I mean, as number of extensions and deployment, these extensions are abusing the login of Facebook and all that, both to distribute. So once they trick you to get an extension that is potentially offering a legitimate service, and sometimes it will actually do that, but behind the scenes it will use that. So, and we've seen them either to distribute that botnet and then do attacks. And the attacks could be click fraud, marketing fraud, but it could also be just additional distribution of things. We've seen them ranking basically they're using the Google login also to rank their own Chrome extension on the Chrome store. And that, again, Google is not detecting that it's someone automatically ranking them, writing a review. So, I mean, it's a huge phenomena, and we have scanners that are scanning the Chrome store to identify them. You see that there are many of them that are basically originating from the same software or malware house. They're extremely smart because they usually will get the payload from the network. So it's a very simple extension that will download a big JavaScript payload, usually a week or so after it's installed, and will basically get controls from and commands from there. They're using other mechanisms as well, but extremely sophisticated and big. Okay. Cool. Sure.